Let's see if this kid's a wizard or schizo.
I have to lay out some vocabulary for y'all. If you want to get straight to the rant about ego, skip forward after this short segment about 23 minutes. Then you'll have just my rant. But I really need to lay out some vocabulary from the psychoanalytical point of view of what ego is and why it's so important, and why all these jackasses keep telling you to dissolve your ego, or that's just ego, blah blah blah. Ego is essential. If it wasn't, you wouldn't have it. But I will continue this rant, this bombardment, about 23 minutes into the video. If you want to skip past the lecture about individualization of personality, then skip forward about 23 minutes after the end of this little short segment, and then you can hear my epic rant. Okay, guys. This is about the individual, the human, the self, yourself. What you consider to be you, what your neighbor considers to be them, your personality, your individuation. Okay, this is broken down into basically two schools of thought that came from two of the major founders of psychoanalytics, Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung. They very much diverged in the yellow wood and went their own paths, but these are basically a breakdown of how Freud and how Jung saw the self. Over here, we have the Jungian breakdown. You have the persona, you have the shadow, the anima or animus, and the self. And for Freud, you have the ego, the superego, and the id. As far as conscious, preconscious, and unconscious, where they divide really is in the unconsciousness. The unconsciousness to Freud is simply your repressed self. Lots of sexual desires, everything from penis envy to the Oedipus issue. And, excuse me, Jung thought that the unconscious was actually more complex than just a personal unconscious. He believed that time spoke to us through genetic memory as well as a cultural, symbolic, archetypical calling from humanity to you, is expressed through not only an individual unconscious, but a collective unconscious, a universal subconscious, where we go in our dreams, where we share our magical symbols, where we communicate with spirits as shamans or priests. So, I'm going to break down everything one step at a time, and the first is going to be Freud's idea of exactly what an ego is.
Imagine in the old times, there's an old buggy, a horse carriage-drawn buggy. And here you've got the horses, which are pulling this buggy forward at breakneck speed. Then what do you got? You've got the rider on top of the buggy who is holding the reins and trying to control the horses, trying to steer the horses. He's also got a whip, so he's whipping the horses to make them run. And that is like the relationship between the id and the ego. The id are the horses. The ego is the rider. He's trying to control the horses. But then, inside the carriage, behind the rider, is his old father. And his father is yelling at the rider, telling him where to steer the carriage. and that is like super ego. So I love this image because it's so easy to remember, and it just clearly illustrates what each one of these functions of the psyche.
Eventually, kids develop the ego part of their personality, that largely conscious component that's charged with dealing with reality. The ego works on getting the id what it wants in a reasonable, timely, and realistic way without, getting arrested or beaten up.
So, that was ego. Yourself. Your raw core. The part that deals with day-to-day minutia. You can think of this as the real part. The part that has emotions, thoughts about money, thoughts about love. These are not your primal urges, these are your day-to-day happenings. Your primal urges we'll go into next. That's the id.
You think of the classic Freudian mind like this iceberg. It's mostly hidden, and that big underwater chunk is your id, your unconscious, primitive, and instinctive self. Freud thought the id was all about sex and aggression, the so-called pleasure principle of immediate gratification. To him, infants were all id. That's in part why babies freak out when they don't get a snack like right now, instead of just taking a deep breath for a second. For that matter, a lot of the off-the-wall celebrities and dictators are big ids. Id's like a honey badger. They don't care.
Alright, there we have the id. The id is that unconscious pull that you have. That well of desire, sexual lust, your most primal urges. Some would say your lizard brain, but it's quite mammalian. If you think about the baser instincts of some of our fellow primates, like chimpanzees, the urges that they have to eat, to secure their food, to secure their mate, to protect their mate, to dominate the rest of the males in the tribe, to have a hierarchy, a patriarchy, as opposed to bonobos, which have a matriarchy and a patriarchy. Just the warlike, aggressive, baser, lesser parts of yourself as a human. Your lusts, your desires, money, fame, the things that corrupt you. That's your id, your unconscious, according to Freud. Next we have that dog barking at your feet, making sure you don't fall off that mountain. Your internal voice, some would say God, but this is basically the thing that keeps everybody on the right path. The thing that tells you not to do something, or to do something, to give the homeless man $5, or to not spend so much of your energy devoted to baseness, to material wants and needs. Next is the superego.
The final aspect to form in Freud's personality trifecta is the superego, the Jiminy Cricket voice of our conscience that represents not just the real, but also the ideal. Superego and the id don't much like each other, and it's up to the referee ego to sort everything out. And it's hard to beat the ego. Freud believed that anxiety comes in part from the ego getting all stressed out about losing control over the id and superego. So he proposed that our egos use a series of indirect and unconscious defense mechanisms to protect themselves from this fear. And each person's particular configuration of defense mechanisms in turn makes up part of what we're referring to here as personality.
Alright guys, we're ready for the young, dumb, and full of fun part of the conversation. We're going to have a little bit of young foo up in this piece, because I am young at heart.
Freud defined the unconscious as a collection of repressed material. Jung went further. He divided the psyche into three parts: the conscious part, which is the ego, the personal unconscious, and the collective unconscious. The collective unconscious was a reason for their breaking. Although Freud could not deny the existence of the instincts, he did not accept the death proposed by Jung to the human psyche. Jung argued that, similar to the evolution of the human body that keeps traces of ancestral bodies, the Cossacks, for instance, the human psyche carries all the previous history of human development. They parted ways when Jung published his book, Symbols of Transformation, in 1912. Jung was then 37 years old. From there on, Jung, who Freud had chosen to be his crown prince, went into a solo career, and their theories continued to diverge. Freud considered the sexual libido to be the only mover of a person. Jung contested him, postulating that the sexual libido was a powerful force in the human psyche, but not the only one. When you are young, the sexual libido may govern your life, but as you grow older, other factors acquire importance. Another major difference between these two geniuses has to do with the way they saw religion. Freud had a critical view on religion and was an atheist. Jung insisted that the human beings should pay attention to their spiritual life. Freud stated about religion, religion is comparable to a childhood neurosis. Religion is an illusion, and it derives its strength from the fact that it falls in with our instinctual desires. On the contrary, Jung considered that the human psyche has by nature religion. In fact, he made this a focus of exploration. Jung was the son of a pastor and he studied, in addition to Christianity, the Eastern religions, alchemy, Gnosticism, mythology, I Ching, astrology, and almost everything that could be classified as occult sciences.
We are going to examine the individuation process, a process Jung believed to be essential for a healthy functioning personality. Such an examination will lead us to explore some of the parts of the personality that Jung viewed as particularly important, namely the persona, the shadow, the anima and animus, and the self.
The first Jungian personality trait we're going to go over is persona. This is who you are at work. This is who you are at church. This is who you are on your first date. This is who society tells you to be. This is who gets dressed in the morning, gets a coffee, and goes to work.
In Jungian psychology, the persona represents the social mask that each of us wear in our interaction with others in society. Or to put it differently, it represents the personality that we try to portray to others. While the persona plays an important role in promoting social interaction and communal life, problems arise when people over-identify with their persona. As Jung writes, fundamentally, the persona is nothing real. It is a compromise between the individual and society as to what a man should appear to be. He takes a name, earns a title, represents an office. He is this or that. In a certain sense, all this is real. Yet in relation to the essential individuality of the person concerned, it is only a secondary reality, a product of compromise, in making which others often have a greater share than he. The persona is a semblance, a two-dimensional reality.
Next, we have my favorite part of individuality according to Carl Jung, which is your shadow. This is very similar to the id in Freudian psychoanalytics. This is your darker self, but it's much more than that as well. There's an integration in Jungian philosophy as opposed to Freudian philosophy. Freudian philosophy, you're always fighting as your ego against your id with the help of your superego, your moral center, to basically repress and hold back the urges of your id. Whereas in Jungian philosophy, the shadow eventually becomes integrated with the conscious mind. And the shadow is a manifestation of not just your unconscious, but the collective unconscious mind. Here we go.
Over the course of one's life, certain personality traits elicit negative feedback and even punishment from others. This negative feedback creates anxiety, resulting in these traits being pushed away from awareness into the unconscious, where they form the shadow, the dark side of one's personality. To become aware of and integrate the shadow into consciousness is often a difficult and sometimes heroic endeavor. But failure to do so can create chaos in one's life. In the darkness of the unconscious, the shadow is far from impotent, but instead influences emotions, thoughts, and behaviors in a manner which is beyond conscious control. Often the shadow finds expression through projections, whereby instead of seeing the disagreeable elements of the shadow as residing within oneself, one projects these traits onto others. Bringing elements of the shadow into the light of consciousness is crucial if one is to correct some of these less desirable aspects of themselves, as Jung explains. Unfortunately, there can be no doubt that man is, on the whole, less good than he imagines himself or wants to be. Everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. If an inferiority is conscious, one always has a chance to correct it, but if it is repressed and isolated from consciousness, it never gets corrected. The shadow, according to Jung, is not only composed of negative traits, rather, in the process of over-identifying with the persona, often people reject personality traits, not because they are harmful, but because they don't fit with the dominant social attitudes of the day.
Next up on the docket is the animus. The animus is your spirit guide. It could be anything from an ancestral spirit to an actual animal form. Much like Fight Club with the penguin saying slide. This is the animal that represents your true self, your sun, S-U-N, if you follow tarot. This is your self of many lifetimes, your many reincarnated self represented as the true you, which more than likely will be an animal that you relate to for some reason. This is not just the entirety of your unremembered lifetimes, but also the gate between the conscious and the unconscious, and the conscious and the universal subconscious, or the universal consciousness. It leads down to some of the darkest parts of yourself, including your shadow. This is the spirit guides that people carve totem poles from. These are the eagles that Native American shamans emulate whenever they wear feathers on their heads and dance in the desert. These are the white buffaloes that bring omens in dreams. These are the dragons of Chinese mythology, brought forward into the conscious mind from the universal subconscious and from, I believe, your unremembered lifetimes to help deal with your shadow, your darker self, and also to help integrate that darker part of yourself into your conscious mind and actively go back and forth between the unconscious, the universal unconscious, and the conscious mind of the individual traveling in this highly conceptual world of mind and spirit.
Another archetype which normally suffers from underdevelopment is a contrasexual archetype termed the anima in males and the animus in females. While the persona is oriented outward, acting as a barrier protecting the ego from the external social world, in an analogous manner the anima and animus is oriented inward, protecting the ego from the sometimes threatening and overwhelming contents which emerge from the dark inner depths of the unconscious. The natural function of the animus, as well as the anima, is to remain in place between individual consciousness and the collective unconscious, exactly as the persona is a sort of stratum between the ego consciousness and the objects of the external world. The animus and the anima should function as a bridge or a door, leading to the images of the collective unconscious, as the persona should be a sort of bridge into the world. An encounter with the anima and animus is manifested in one's consciousness as a meeting in dreams or visions with a member of the opposite gender. Such a figure often arises during times of severe psychic disorientation, offering guidance as to how to remove any psychological barricades hindering the natural progression of the individuation process. Encountering such an archetype can therefore signify the coming of a deeply meaningful period in one's life, defined by significant psychological transformations. The meeting with the anima represents a connection to the unconscious even deeper than that of the shadow. In the case of the shadow, it is a meeting with the disdained and rejected pieces of the total psyche, the inferior and unwanted qualities. In the meeting with the anima, it is a contact with levels of the psyche which has the potential to lead into the deepest and highest reaches that the ego can attain.
And last but not least, the most important part of Jungian individualization, the personality, is the true self, the integrated self, the self that is whole. This is all about wholeness. This is about the individuality. This is about using your animus to merge your persona, but also what you consider to be your regular personality, with your shadow by means of the animus. So, last but not least, the self.
The self is our life's goal, for it is the completest expression of that fateful combination we call individuality. As the sun occupies the center of the solar system, in an analogous manner, the self is the central archetype of the entire psyche. The self-archetype acts as the unifying or organizing principle of the psyche and is oriented toward a union of the conscious and unconscious realms. Jung noted that the more numerous and more significant the unconscious contents which are assimilated to the ego, the closer the approximation of the ego to the self, even though this approximation must be a never-ending process. As one increasingly identifies with the self, they will notice a greater sense of harmony both within themselves and with the world as a whole. In fact, Jung saw a connection with the self as so important that at various times he described it as a treasure that would make one independent and a link to the infinite. Along with these personal benefits, Jung thought the process of individuation was essential for the well-being of society. Jung believed that conformist societies, composed mainly of people who over-identify with their persona, are easy prey for the rise of oppressive governments. Therefore, it is essential for any lasting positive societal change that increasing numbers of people, assisted by the individuation process, come to the realization that there is more to their being than the social role dictated by their persona. A society increasingly composed of individuated individuals would not, according to Jung, succumb as easily to the rise of oppressive governments. Insofar as society is itself composed of de-individualized human beings, it is completely at the mercy of ruthless individualists. Let it band together into groups and organizations as much as it likes. It is just this banding together and the resultant extinction of the individual personality that makes it succumb so readily to a dictator. A million zeros joined together do not, unfortunately, add up to one.
Well, hopefully you guys now understand the 3 Freudian and the 4 Jungian individualization markers that I painstakingly went over with y'all. Just to clarify vocabulary. This whole 20 minutes or so has just been to clarify vocabulary, because the next part of this video is going to be just a rant about ego and why people need to stop telling other people to dissolve their ego. This is a slap in the face to anybody. I don't care if you're a mystic, guru, or a YouTube personality. If you're telling people to eliminate their ego, then you're a moron. And I'm going to explain why. Enjoy. I'm going to put maybe 10 seconds of some hardcore music in here just to amp you guys up for my roaring rant that is about to come your way.
It happened a few years ago, and there's a story on it which you can find up here. And I think that to most people, And ego death, especially whether it be through psychedelics or naturally, is one of the most sought-after experiences in spirituality, because it gives us that glimpse into ultimate reality, into a place of being beyond the ego. And many people want to know how I can kill my ego, how I can experience, even if only briefly, this wiping away of ego, this ego death, this ego loss.
The multiverse, reincarnation. First off, reincarnation. You have been male and female, black and white. You've died old, you've died young. You've been an Arab or a Jew. You've been a Christian and a witch, pagan, whatever. You have been both male and female. You've been many yous. Your current personality, the biological organism that is currently watching this video, the entity that has particular likes and tastes, like the color purple, or the Walking Dead TV show, or indie rock, or cupcakes, whatever it is that makes you, your personality, your likes, your dislikes, your interests, your hobbies, the things you love, the things you want to do with your life, etc., your experiences. That's your persona. That is just the name that you carry, whether it's George, Harvey, Gary, whatever. It is a name that is assigned to this particular lifetime. It is a set of experiences. These are retained, at least the most important ones that are karmically attributing to your growth as a spiritual being, are preserved within what your Buddhist religions call the clear light. The clear light is a non-physical flash drive of the spiritual world that preserves the highlights, the most important parts, lessons, and experiences that you learn throughout that lifetime. And it's basically, if you think about your biological entity that you currently are, like a computer. That computer has an amount of data stored on it. Videos, music, conversations. A lot of stuff is stored on the hard drive of your computer. Let's say your computer is getting updated because yours is too old and it's about to die. Like your physical body at the point of death. But you want to keep some of the files that are on there, the most important stuff at least. So you take a flash drive with a lot of gigabytes, you plug it in, and you download all the most important pictures and music and movies, whatever, onto that flash drive, that portable hard drive. And then whenever you get a new computer, something that's fresh out the box, a new baby to be born into, that flash drive is plugged back into the computer. But so as not to slow the hard drive down on the new computer, you store the most important documents, pictures, etc. in a second profile, in a second unused portion of the computer. In your brain, this place doesn't technically exist. It is a non-dimensional space that your brain generates by creating multi-dimensional sandcastles, as they say in the Blue Brain Project, the Human Brain Project continuum. That's how your brain accesses memories. Basically, they're stored off-site in a different, higher spatial dimension. It's insane to think about, but that's how your brain works. That's why they can't find a particular area of your brain that stores data, because really it's just a bunch of synaptic correspondence that relay information basically via a human interweb, an internet, a Wi-Fi, a wireless communication between your network and a universal network, what Carl Carl Jung called the universal consciousness. So whenever I say that your ego, your current personality, the you, the I, whenever I say I am going to breakfast, that being is just a chapter in a book, and that book is the real you. Each chapter is named after a different human that you've been, and even though you might not be able to see readily the connection between all the chapters, there is definitely a underlying theme. That is what your spirit finds necessary for spiritual growth and completion. I feel that a lot of people, whenever they say shed the ego, what they're trying to say is become aware of your multi-person self. Now, to deny your ego is counterproductive, because you are born into this ego, this personality, this worldview, to encounter and experience it's karmically that would help you grow. So if you deny your current ego, you cannot have the necessary growth that you find to be lacking in whenever you judge yourself spiritually on the point of death. Like I've said before, there is no God judging you at the end of your life. Only your true spiritual self, unbound by the mind and the body, who cannot lie to himself or herself itself, because really you're male and female in that being, because you've been both multiple times. You are judging yourself, the experiences that you gave your clear light through that title of the chapter of that book. You find whether or not you have raised your spiritual mass to the point where it can ignite and turn into a spiritual star. But honestly, if you haven't achieved the kingdom of heaven in life, then you do not achieve it in death. You have to first enter heaven in the flesh before you can enter it in the spirit. Because the kingdom of heaven is a state of enlightenment. And if you do not die enlightened as a physical being, you do not inherit enlightenment in death, regardless of how much you feel like you've accomplished in this lifetime. You will not ever judge yourself worthy of entering the kingdom of heaven by communicating with your spiritual self at the point of death in a non-awoke state of being. In other words, the beginning is the end is the beginning. The fool encounters the enlightened man right as soon as he walks out of his door. A elderly man does not hesitate to ask a newly born baby, what is the realm of life like? Because he knows that where he is going, that baby just came from. If you do not die with enlightenment, you do not transcend the reincarnation process and you will be born again. Now, like I said, this has to do with the multiverse as well. Because not only are you both male and female, as the Gospel of St. Thomas said, in order to become one, you have to first become two. And that Mary Magdalene would be made a male by Christ through his personal tutelage. And through being both male and female, she would enter the kingdom of heaven. I believe this is what he was talking about, was realizing that your higher dimensional self, your multi-reincarnational self, is a book, not a bunch of chapters. But your personality, I'm gonna wait for this ambulance to go by. multi-reincarnational self that has existed for generations upon generations, seen death multiple times, seen life multiple times. That is an undying being. But it will have to die at some point. And that death is the cessation of reincarnation. That death is the end of rebirth. And the birth into a completely spiritual realm of life ceaselessly. Being an energetic being. This is what some people get confused with and think that this is your, like, a lot of people imagine this world is actually a computer simulation, and there is some kind of pod where your true body is outside of this network. You're only plugged into it like the Matrix, like the pod self, you know, where Neo was awoken out of after he took the pill. That true self that people like Ogtelis talks about, that's not connected, but, you know, influencing this world. They're wrong. The pod self, the true self, which is what Sigmund Freud would call the superego, your consciousness, your Jiminy Cricket too, your conscience. That is your true self that's lived multiple lifetimes. Now, like I said, the multiverse, and its relation to this. I believe that we are currently residing within a universe, one of a nearly infinite number of stacked universes, in a framework of stacked, layered, possible realities. And within that framework, there are realities that you can achieve, and that humans, Earth, life, whatever, could achieve if certain choices or decisions or happenstance comes into being. For instance, in the multiverse, in one of the possible realities which we exist in, I do not smoke a cigarette. However, in this reality, I'm about to smoke another cigarette. So, me not smoking a cigarette in my reality causes a different multiverse to spring into being, because one of the ones became a zero. That created a whole different multiverse. So in that sense, I'm existing in all possible causal frameworks which I have the ability to manipulate, both past, present, and future. So I am multiple selves, multiple Stevens, currently. My spirit, myself, is existing in every single causal reality throughout the multiverse, and almost an infinite number of personal Stevens. So not only have I existed as multiple beings throughout time through the process of reincarnation, a process of spiritual transmigration of the experience of each individual through time-space, an undying spirit currently residing within Stephen Lawson. I'm also multiples of Stephen Lawson, and I've been multiples of every previous chapter title. Diane Johnson, or whatever. I have been many people who have been many people. An almost infinite number
times an almost incomprehensible number of experiences, going all the way back to blue-green algae and the first duplicating cells, the first living organisms, the first experience, the first choices, moving left or moving right, absorbing this element for nutrient or this element for nutrients. We have been so much life, it's almost incomprehensible. So whenever people talk about shedding the ego, they have to realize that whenever you're talking about ego, you're talking about your current chapter in the book of your spiritual life, an almost infinite number of times throughout the multiverse. Now let's say there is a book like this, an Akashic Records of sort, a personal spiritual book, and it has a story about every one of your lifetimes, and it's just laid out one after the other. Let's say that that book goes on sale, and it becomes a bestseller and sells 10 million copies right off the bat. Those 10 million people read the book, and let's say that in the book there is 100 chapters, for simplicity's sake, 100 different lifetimes. Now, each one of those 100 million people will have their own preferences, their own lifetimes / chapters that they relate to more than other chapters. Just like I'm sure that you and your spiritual self have lifetimes that you find preferable to other lifetimes where you might have been sick and hungry or miserable, cold, whatever. You might prefer a lifetime where you had a boat and a big field and lots of money or something. I don't know. Excuse me. Now, those 10 million readers will find a chapter, an individual chapter, or maybe multiple chapters that they find preferable. That makes it so that no chapter is insignificant because someone can find something in each one of those chapters that they connect with. Just like each one of your lifetimes is very significant. It's teaching you lessons, gathering experiences that you need to become enlightened. This ego that you currently have is made up of nothing but experiences that you've gained through reality and operating within this reality, and the thoughts you've had while existing within this reality. These experiences, thoughts, ideas that add to the growth of your spiritual mass are very, very necessary. Now, this could be you falling in love, meeting someone that taught you this lesson about love that you needed to know on a spiritual level. This could be getting a job that you found largely insignificant, but after 30 years of working at the mattress company, somebody came in and said something that triggered something that started a change in your life that made you become aware of something that you lacked previously that was necessary for spiritual growth. Whether this is joining a commune, or becoming a Hare Krishna, or selling all your belongings and preaching on the streets, or adopting somebody. Every single choice you make in this life is a reflection of the karmic individual that exists outside of this fleshly body. Your true self, your clear light, your non-gender non-dualistic spiritual body. Shedding your ego is the worst possible thing you could do, because it is denying your spirit the experiences it sought to gather through reincarnation into this ego. Through the choices that you will make in this multiverse, you would find something, find some variable that would help you grow as a being, that would help you become more than you currently are, that would help you understand, that would help you find more of the puzzle we call the truth. And the closer you get to this, the more readily information comes to you. And if you shed your ego by trying to become part of the universal consciousness, you miss the point of the universal consciousness. The universal consciousness is like the internet. The internet is only usable through a computational device, whether it's a phone, tablet, or computer. For simplicity's sake, let's just say computers. Computers are necessary for the internet to work, because the internet is nothing but a compilation of a bunch of connected together computers sharing data. And servers, which are basically just big computers with lots of hard drive. Okay, so the universal consciousness you seem to merge with by shedding your ego. You have to have a computer to dial into that consciousness, to dial into that internet. If you deny yourself the ability to act through a computer, then you can't access the consciousness. More than that, and this is the true point, you are denying the internet access to a computer that it could need through like a blockchain of sorts. For instance, the 100th monkey syndrome, or any other number of experiments they've done where they show that teaching a certain number of a species a trick allows it to spread throughout the entire world organism through that species, and all members of that species learn the trick. Just like the whole crossword puzzle thing, where if you give a bunch of people a crossword puzzle the next day, you deny people a newspaper the previous day and then tell them to do the crossword puzzle, they get a higher percentage of answers correct because the answers are already floating around in the universal subconscious, the universal consciousness of Carl Jung. Now, by shedding your ego, you're denying that universal consciousness access to your information, access to the experiences that you have gathered throughout that day, year, lifetime, whatever. This is the key to all of this. If you have not paid attention thus far, just pay attention to this one part. This is God. You know those little paintings that are made up of little dots? There's a whole bunch of little dots of different shades, hues, and colors. All the dots, some of them very, very similar, but none of them identical. Some very, very close, almost identical. But through all of these little colored dots of different shades and hues and lightnesses and darknesses, it fills up this page. Once you stand far enough back, all those little dots turn into an image. That is the face of God. The image itself is made up of all these little dots. The little dots are the individual ego personality types, human experiences, and all life experiences of every living organism that would ever exist, past, present, and future, throughout the entire multiverse, has its own little dot on that picture, that image. Each dot is important. If you shed your ego, let's say that you turn your dot white, because it's not contributing anything, because it's like all the colors added together, just like light. all the colors added together are white. White light contains within it all the other colors of light. So let's say that by shedding your ego and becoming just an expression of the universal consciousness, you become a white dot. And let's say that white is the only color that truly repeats itself on that image, which is an image of God, God's face. Let's say that each one of these little fucking dots is very important until you get to the white dots. Because one, there's more than one white dot. Through being a part of everything, they become really nothing. And become only this negative space on the image. If you have enough people doing this, they're not adding anything to the universal consciousness. They're not adding a unique set of experiences to life. They're not contributing to their spiritual growth or the spiritual growth of the planet, the consciousness grid. Through being part of everything, they're really, truly part of nothing. Now, that is not to say that I, as Stephen Lawson, this set of experiences in the physical body. That is not to say that I can't also realize that I am multiple me's existing in the multiverse, and a spiritual me that is the culmination of all previous lifetimes I have lived. Stephen Lawson is very much aware of this fact. But Stephen Lawson does not exist as that spiritual being on the daily. I do not have access to all of my memories from all previous lifetimes. I feel like I have access to a few, but that could just be me being a little bit crazy. Who knows? But I feel that Stephen Lawson is intrinsic to the growth of this being. The spiritual being. And I feel that the key is to realizing that you are both one and two. You are one individual, but multiple individuals. The key is to keep your ego, but to find your superego. To find your true spiritual self, as Carl Jung says, to integrate that self with your persona. Now, if you try to shed your ego and become just part of this plethora of spiritual whatnots, then what are you adding? What are you giving? Because I could very well say that I am this tree, I am the air, I am the ants living on this ground, I am the humans driving in cars, I am God expressed in this one being, but also in all beings simultaneously. That's a Hindi perspective that is very, very true. But to deny that I'm this unique perspective denies not only my biology, which has given me the eyes, the ears, the brain to take in information, process it, and learn, but is denying my spirit the opportunity that it sought in this life to learn from karmic decisions by separating yourself from your karma. You can't just deny yourself and expect to become enlightened. That's so important. You cannot just deny yourself and expect to become enlightened. You have to accept yourself, forgive yourself, realize that you are all beings that you've ever been in, and one being, and integrate the two. Become Stephen Lawson plus. Because that's what you are.
And that's why religion, in practice, mainly produces hypocrisy and guilt. Because of the constant failure of these enterprises. Oh, people go and study Zen. And they come back and say, wow, getting rid of your ego is a superhuman task. I assure you it's going to be very, very difficult to get rid of your ego. You're going to have to sit for a long time, and you're going to get the sorest legs. It's hard work. And all you wretched kids who think you're getting rid of your ego on part or something or other and easy yoga, you don't know what you're in for when it really comes down to the nitty-gritty. But you know, the biggest ego trip going is getting rid of your ego.